So thank you very much, everyone, for joining tonight, and just wanted to let you know that this is the first in our series of Evening with Events. As some of you may recall, we had planned to run this as a live event with Claude Littner last year, but for obvious reasons we weren't able to do that. However, we didn't want to miss the opportunity altogether, so we're hosting it together here today virtually. So I'm pleased to say that we've got well over 100 people. It's nearing 150 people on the line at the moment, and I hope that in the not too distant future we'll be able to meet in person and actually see each other in 3D. So just a small piece of housekeeping to take you through tonight. Although I'm sure all of you know where the fire escapes are, I do need to let you know that we are recording the event and we'll be sending out a link tomorrow. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. We've got Claude Littner with us, who is a client and good friend of BKL. You might have heard of Claude as the tough interviewer from the Apprentice or the CEO of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, but he's also been involved in running businesses for nearly 50 years. He's had particular success at business turnarounds, one of his most successful being the Power League. He's a visiting professor at the University of West London, which in 2014, in honour of its alumnus, renamed the business school to the Claude Littner Business School. And as if that didn't keep him busy enough, he's also written a book, Single Minded, which reveals the story of his very career and the turbulent years that have shaped him. And maybe we'll hear some of those stories tonight. Jeff Hartstone's also with us. He's one of BKL's senior partners and has been with the firm for over 30 years. He works closely with Claude and is a friend and trusted advisor. Jeff provides strategic advice to SMEs and their owners, ensuring that their business and personal goals are aligned. So the format for today's session is that we'll hear from Claude and Jeff, and that will take us to about 25 to 7, 20 to 7. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A button below, and I'll read out as many as I can on your behalf at the end. If you wish to remain anonymous, then of course you can. So without further ado, over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Simon. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Claude.
Good evening.
Thank you once again for taking the time to be with us this evening. I have to say, I feel a bit daunted interviewing the man who's so well known from The Apprentice as being the toughest interviewer. I hope you're not going to give me a hard time tonight.
No, you can relax. I've had my tablets. I'm calm.
That's good. So maybe let's start with on the subject of interviews. And what is it you look for when you're interviewing a candidate for a job?
Well, I think there are a number of things that one looks for, really. I think the first thing is that when the person walks in, and these are trivial things, but they have some importance, is that they give you eye contact. They seem to have a pleasant kind of disposition, and that they have done their research on the company or the position that's being advertised. So I think it's very important for the person to turn up on time or before time, that the person looks presentable and prepared for the interview. And the interview could take a number of different forms, and I suppose it depends on the skill of the interviewer. Some interviewers put you at ease immediately, and so you feel relaxed, and others have got a more stern discipline about them. I'm not quite sure which I fall into. And you've got to remember that the Apprentice interviews are quite different from normal interviews, because in a normal interview, you really are trying to find the best candidate for the job. And it is a two-way process, because the candidate should also be seeing whether there's a good fit between what he has to offer and what is on offer. So unlike The Apprentice, where it's a one-way traffic, a real interview is one where you're trying to find out from each other whether there's a good fit, whether the individual will enjoy being with the company and has the attributes required, whether you feel that person will fit into the team because you know the team that he or she is going into. And I think it's important also, and I found this to my great chagrin a lot of times, is that when people go in for the interviews, they're either very, very nervous, and this may be understandable, but also when you ask them questions and try and relax them, they answer in a monosyllabic way. And really that's not the kind of interview you want. You really want each party to share with the other, so that there's, at the end of the interview, there's a fair idea of whether that person is going to be right for the job and whether the person actually feels that they're right for that particular role. So I think that's it. And I think it's also important for the individual to have some questions, so that it's not just one-way traffic with the interviewer asking. It's important also for the employee or prospective employee to contribute to the conversation. So those are my kind of key messages for interviews. The other thing I say just in closing is that if you don't get the job, it's not because you're not a good candidate or because you did a bad interview necessarily. It's just that for that particular job, there may have been a candidate who was more suited. And so I think what's important is not to be discouraged or dismayed if the interview doesn't go well. I think it's important to perhaps follow up with a letter or an email afterwards saying how much you enjoyed the interview and how much you hope that they'll offer you the job. Because if the person that they interview or who they choose doesn't come up to standard or to scratch, it may well be that they may get in touch with you at a later date. And I think the other thing is also to really just show your appreciation of the fact that they've spent time with you, and that your next interview, hopefully, you will have learned a little bit about what the interview process is about and how to answer the questions, perhaps a little bit better than you did the first time.
So it's always struck me, Claude, that interviews are a very odd thing. You meet somebody for an hour, maybe a little bit longer, and at the end of that, you offer them a job, and then I would say half the time, actually, they don't come up to scratch that you thought they would come up to. So have you employed, or would you employ other methods of testing, psychometric? Do you believe in that kind of thing?
Well, I personally don't, only because if I ever took a psychometric test, I'd fail. So I'm not much in favour of that kind of thing. But I know in France, for example, where I worked for quite a number of years, they're very, very keen on all that kind of stuff. But to me, I think the interview is not a foolproof process, that's for sure. The only way you're going to find out if a person is going to be good at the job, or where you've made the right choice, is when they actually get into the workplace. You see them operating, you see their personality, you see their strengths and weaknesses, you try and help them through patches where they're perhaps not performing well. And if it goes well and all that works, then you made a great choice and it's wonderful. Everyone's happy, hopefully. But if it's not, then either party is then free to walk away or to kind of realize that it was a mistake. And as experienced as I am at interviewing, I've made mistakes and some very expensive mistakes really in choosing someone who was great at the interview, who made a great impression on me, who kind of conned me, if you like. And when they got to the job, I found them to be just very poor, or if not poor, just didn't suit. It wasn't the character they displayed at the interview. So it's not a perfect process, but it's the only one I know. And
I read somewhere you had an interesting first interview with Lord Sugar. Is that something you can share with us?
No, look, I think Alan Sugar is a one-off. And the more I know him, and I've known him for 30 years, the more I understand him and I understand his nature. I almost know what he's going to say next. So it's very difficult to judge him or anyone on an interview. But the interview that I did have came about in a rather strange way, because a friend of mine was going out with a friend of mine, and the guy said to me, "Are you looking for a job?" And it so happens I was looking for a job. I've just come back from France and I was looking for a job. I had a period of unemployment, if you like, where I was applying for jobs. And this chap said, "No, I think my brother-in-law might have a job for you. He's looking for talented people." So I said, "Well, no, thank you very much indeed." I didn't know his brother-in-law was, but it didn't matter to me. And then he came and said, "Yes, well, my brother-in-law would like to see you." So I said, "Well, that's great. Who is he?" "Well, it's Alan Sugar." Well, I'd never met him, obviously, but no one could fail to know him even 30 years ago. And when I went to see him, my eyes lit up, as one does occasionally when you see someone famous or meet someone for the first time, as I did with you, Jeff, if you recall. And so I went into this room and we sat at a round table. I had my CV there, and he didn't say a word to me. Didn't say a word. So I was sitting at the table. He was sitting at the table. And he was kind of flipping through my CV and showed no interest. So after a little while, I said, "Well, shall I tell you a bit about myself?" And he sort of said, "Yeah, go on then." words to that effect. So I started telling him about how great I was really and how much experience I had now. I didn't know what the job was, by the way, but just basically what a good chap I was and really how employable I was and things like that really. And whilst I was explaining all that, he kind of was kind of going, just in a very disarming sort of way. And then he looked out of the window into the sales floor, and my recollection is that he started whistling a little tune to himself. So after a while, I realized this was a complete waste of time. It was a complete waste of time. My face didn't fit. I was obviously wrong for the job. He wasn't interested in me. And maybe it was his brother-in-law who had sort of cajoled him into interviewing me. And so I stopped talking. And as I stopped talking, he got up, walked out. And as he walked past me, he said, what I thought he said was bored. But apparently what he said was speak to the board. And within a few minutes, in came this marketing director, Bernard. And Bernard said, you got the job, Alan likes you. How could he like me? He never showed any eye contact. He showed no interest in me whatsoever. And anyway, what was the job? Anyway, the following week, I was working for Amstrad, and that began quite a long history with Alan Sugar.
That must have been quite an experience.
It was an experience. I'll just very, very quickly tell you that I went to the European headquarters. I was the chairman of the European headquarters of Amstrad, which was based in Paris, and it was a shambles. I shouldn't really say so, but it was a shambles. So I thought that after a few days of being there, I thought the professional thing to do was to actually send him a fax. I'm not sure if anyone remembers what a fax actually is, but I sent him a fax really outlining all the things that were wrong with the company and all the things I discovered in my sort of 4 or 5 days working there. And maybe it was 5 or 6 pages. By the time the second page went through, my phone rang. So I picked up the phone and it was Alan on the phone. And I couldn't repeat the actual language, but the essence of it was, I'm not paying you all this money for telling me what the problems are. Fix the problems and call me when you fixed it all. Down went the phone. Well, that was good news and bad news. The good news was it meant that I had free rein to get on with it. But the bad news was, of course, that I hadn't made a great impression on him the first time at the interview, clearly, or the second time at our second confrontation. And it didn't get much better as time went on, I've got to say, because it was very much a kind of master-servant relationship. And he's got a very intimidating way. So however much you think I'm intimidating, Alan Sugar is really intimidating. Even now, when I look into his eyes, which I try not to do, you know, he's got a certain style about him, a certain presence, which he doesn't mean to do it necessarily, but he's quite a serious, forceful individual. I mean, I've got to kind of grow to love him, but I can imagine that that he puts the fear into people quite quickly.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I wanted to ask you whether you think entrepreneurs like Alan Sugar, Richard Branson, you know, is that something that can be learned, or is it an innate sort of ability?
Well, Alan is Alan, I suppose. You know, the other entrepreneurs that one can mention are individuals, and they've got their own individual style. I don't think that just because somebody is imposing and frightening, that is the key for every single entrepreneur. I've met many people who are very successful, and they are very charming, very eloquent, and have got a different persona. So I don't think you've got to be kind of that ilk to be an entrepreneur. And as far as you know, whether entrepreneurs can learn to be entrepreneurs, my answer really is that they can. Now, you've got naturals, one-offs like Alan Sugar and many others, but you've also got people who presumably have come through the ranks and have learnt to apply their trade, have learnt how to behave, how to manage people, how to you know, motivate people, and there's no reason why those kind of people can't and don't become very successful entrepreneurs. So I don't think it's one size fits all. I just think that very often your personality does play a very, very important part. And certainly I felt that my personality has been a strength in terms of making sure that people understand that I'm very serious about business and how I want things done. But I don't think that's necessarily the only way to behave. It just happens to suit my personality.
I'm a bit of a book lover, and apart from your own book, I've also read the autobiographies of both Alan Sugar and Richard Branson, amongst others. What comes across in theirs, if not in yours so much, is that they've made mistakes in the past, and perhaps they've become better entrepreneurs as a result of making mistakes. I just wondered, in your career, whether you feel you've made mistakes, and whether you've learned from those mistakes, and what you've learned from those mistakes.
Well, I don't think you can be in business or be an employee without making mistakes. It's part of the human nature and part of the learning process. You make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. If people say that I've never made a mistake, they're just lying. Because you can't help, if you're making decisions, it's kind of, you weigh things up and you cannot possibly get it right every single time. The key to being successful, I think, is that you try not to make the same mistakes. You try and learn from your mistakes. You try and learn from others, good and bad. And I know from my own experience, the first job I had as a kind of graduate trainee was at Lucas CAV, and that was an appalling company, an absolutely appalling company. The managers were remote from the workers. They had a factory underneath in the basement of the building, and the management never spoke to the workforce. Industrial relations were appalling, and so I learned a lot from that, if you like, from just how not to manage people, how not to treat people. And I resolved, even at a young age, that if I ever got to a position of any responsibility where I was responsible for other people, that I would try and behave as a human being. Now, I haven't always followed those rules, and very often I've been too harsh, I've been too judgmental, I've made mistakes, which I regret, but I have learned from really the things what not to do. And over time, I still make mistakes. I laugh at myself at how foolish I can be for making mistakes that really I should have learned by now not to make. But I just think that that's the nature of business and the nature of life, really. You know, you may have regrets about things that you've said inappropriately or at the wrong time or the wrong tone, that you think of afterwards and think, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said it in that way. So I don't think you can go through life without making mistakes.
Do you think it was a mistake joining Tottenham? If you had a choice, I don't know if you had a choice, but do you have a mistake? Well,
one's always got a choice. I mean, Alan asked me to go to Spurs in 1993. That wasn't what I wanted, because he'd promised me a role within Amstrad as a chief executive. That's the role I wanted, and I saw the Tottenham Hotspur opportunity as one that was sidelining me. I mean, how wrong I was. But at that time, it just seemed to be off the mainstream. And even though I've been a Tottenham supporter all my life, any job is not a matter of going where I like. It's a matter of doing a job to the best of my ability and trying to get it done. So when he offered me the Spurs job, I really pretty well refused him. But he then went on to say, look, it's like World War III out there, and you're the only person who can sort it out, Claude. So with those words, those magic words, he fooled me into believing that I really was the only person who could do it, and went to Tottenham. And in fact, Tottenham was difficult. It was difficult. If I had the opportunity again, and I'm not wishing for it, but if I had the opportunity again of being chief executive of Tottenham Hotspur, I would do a much better job. Because what I missed, and I regret it bitterly, is that Spurs is not a normal company. It is a normal company. In fact, it was quoted on the London Stock Exchange at the time. But what I missed was the fact that I was all about making a profit, getting things right, getting rid of the fraud, just maximizing the amount of money we could take, so that the bottom line would look great. And I missed the fact that it's got a real heart and soul. I missed the heart and soul of the club. And whilst I wouldn't want to speak about Arsenal, the thing is that David Dean, who was the vice chairman at the time, he understood. He had a connection with the fans, with the players, and generally it was a much more inclusive type of situation. Whereas I came in all guns blazing, and I made it impossible for people working in the company, and also not very pleasant for the football players either, because it all kind of seeped down, that kind of insistence on everything being absolutely right. Whereas if I had my time again, I think I'd take a much more gentle approach. I think I'd still get to where I wanted to get to. It might take a bit more time, but I'd take people with me. I don't think my Spurs experience was my finest hour. Having said that, when I see Darren Anderton, for example, in the boardroom, not in the boardroom, at Tottenham, he always says to me how pleased he was with what I'd done and how grateful he is for the things I did. But I think he's in a minority.
Because you paid his sick leave, didn't you? You paid his sick leave.
Like sick notes.
Yeah. So interestingly, I mean, it doesn't sound like much of a mistake, that, but let's focus on some successes. And you mentioned that you were trying to turn around the situation at Tottenham, and that's one of the things that you, I think, enjoy doing and have done a lot during your career. Is there a secret to turnarounds? And perhaps talk us through the process with Power League and how you came to be involved in that, and what situation it was when you joined and how you managed to turn that around. That would be, I think, interesting for people to hear.
Well, I think the situation at Power League was not too different from the situation of many of the other companies that I've been involved in terms of turnaround, in that they are on their last legs. Either the venture capitalist wants to walk away, or the bank have been lumbered with the debt and a horrible company. And so that's been the kind of pattern, almost that when everyone's failed, they've invited me to go in and see if I can sort of restore the situation. So taking Power League as just one example, really, what had happened is that 3i had invested something like £50 million in Power League, and they joined two companies together to make Power League, five-a-side football, which was very popular. It was in its infancy to a certain extent, but it was still very popular. The trouble is that these two entities didn't get on well, and they weren't focusing on what was important. Their focus was in making football a kind of an interesting adjunct to the bar, because they thought that people would be watching Sky Sports, would be sitting at the bar, drinking, enjoying themselves and having a social time. And the football was just a vehicle to get them to spend all their money at the bar. Whereas that's not true at all. What the truth is that everything was to do with football. And people came along, they came along to play their hour of football, which they absolutely loved. And then they left because they weren't going to drink, because they just had a healthy exercise. They had to go to work the following day, so they weren't going to hang around at the pub, so to speak. And that was a significant mistake that the previous management had done by focusing on just the wrong thing. And I think in all these turnarounds, it's very important, obviously, to listen to what people are saying, but to try and get an appreciation of what's gone wrong, who did what, why did it happen, and to try and form a picture of how you can make it better and who's going to make it better. Because I don't know very much about the oil services business, five-a-side football, computers, all these sort of things, but I think it's very important that you can somehow put a team together who do understand about it. And so if I've got any strengths at all, it's a matter of picking the right kind of people, motivating, managing them, and making sure that we're focusing on the right kind of things, and that people don't make the same mistakes again, like getting us into contracts which are onerous and we can't get out of. Just trying to control things in a way that hopefully we can then discover the bottom line. With Power League, it was very simple, really. Some of the people just were focusing on the wrong thing. I had to get rid of the finance director, got rid of the managing director, got rid of a whole load of people who just weren't prepared to work hard. There was cash that was leaking out of the business all the time, as was happening at Spurs also, by the way. And so we had to sort of put processes into place whereby we had a handle on how many people were coming in and playing five-a-side football, and therefore every day we could see how much we were taking, so to make sure that actually all the money was ending up in our bank account and not people's pockets, or people were playing for free. So once we sort of got those things organized, at that point we began to see the company improving. And really at that point I said to 3i, I said, look, I can turn this company around. You've invested £50 million. I can turn it around. Give me a bit of time, and I promise you, you're going to have a success. But by that time, they'd run out of patience. The guy who was on the board, which was a 3i director on the board, he'd run out of patience as well. And they said, look, Claude, we've had enough. We've had enough. Why don't you buy the company? And so I did. I bought the company for a song. It did have a lot of debt, which Bank of Scotland had, but I reached an arrangement with them, and it just worked out very, very well, to the extent, I think, that when I came to sell the company, I think we sold it for 50 or 60 million pounds. So if only, well, I'm very, very pleased, but I'm very pleased by that. But the point is that if only 3i had hung on for a little bit longer, they would have seen a return on their investment.
And you mentioned before that Tottenham was a public company, and I think in the process of selling Power League, you took it through an AIM flotation. And I think some of our business audience would love to hear the rationale for putting a company onto AIM and what experiences you had of AIM, good and bad.
Okay. Well, my aim was to keep it a private company because we were throwing off loads of cash. It was a wonderful business. We were answerable to nobody. I mean, basically, I was chairman. I had a chief executive who I had promoted from the ranks. We had a finance director, and basically the three of us were very, very happy with each other, and we were doing very, very well. We had a competitor who was moving ahead very, very strongly called Goals, and they went on AIM, and my chief executive, who didn't have money, if you like, was really pushing me so that to sell some shares, to go on AIM, so that he could actually collect some money. From my point of view, I didn't see the point. I was comfortable, and I could see that the money was coming in, and AIM just wasn't very attractive to me. But because our competitor had gone on AIM and their share price was sky high, their valuation was sky high, I was seduced into going on AIM. And actually, it was very exciting because suddenly people were taking notice of me. The brokers were taking notice. We would go around the city and everyone was treating us very, very nicely. We got to tell our story, and it was a good story. So we felt very good. Everyone seemed to be very keen to invest, and we had a jolly good time going around having a wonderful time. And then it came to the kind of flotation, which was very successful, and it was very, very nice. But then the pain set in because we talked up the business. Obviously, that's what you do a little bit. So, whatever profit we were making, we said we'd increase it by whatever percentage. And then we actually had to do it. And when we said we'd open, next 12 months, we'd open a further 5 centres. Everyone was noting it down. Everyone believed it. They bought the shares on the basis that we were telling the truth, and you had a serious management team. But actually, talking about opening 5 centres is much more difficult than actually opening 5 centres. And so we were suddenly confronted with a situation of perhaps failing to do what we said we'd do. So what we do, and this is maybe taking this out of sequence, but we maybe opened the 5 centres, but if we hadn't had that pressure of opening 5 centres because we said that's what we do in the next 12 months, we may have only opened 2 or 3. We put pressure on ourselves, and the city put pressure on us, always wanting more. So you opened 5 centres in the last 12 months. Well done. How are they going? Well, very well. Not really, because it takes time for them to settle down and for the business to come through. So how many will you be opening next year? Well, if you opened 5 last year, we'll go for 8. So it just became more and more difficult and more stressful, and all the time I was thinking to myself, I don't need this. We were so happy, the 3 of us, collecting money, having everything under where they wanted, not answerable to anybody, and yet the city were quite right, because they bought the shares on the basis that we were going to fulfill our promise, and essentially what we were doing is spending about 20–25% of our time preparing notes so the brokers could put out nice reports about the company. When we had the meetings, we always had to make sure that we were on track. If we'd only opened 4 in the first 6 months, we had to guarantee that we would open another 4 in the next 6 months, and it became a bit of an uphill struggle. And what culminated in it for me, particularly, was JJB had a lot of very desirable 5-a-side centres. Some of them were indoor. They were massive, wonderful centres, brilliant centres. And my chief executive, and I'm not blaming him because he's a super bloke, but he thought, look, we've got to get hold of this. We've got to get hold of these JJB centres, because if we don't get hold of it, Goals are going to get hold of it. And that's terrible, because then they'll get ahead of us. So we got ourselves into a situation where we paid, I don't know, £17.3 million for these centres, just so that we could prevent goals from getting the centre. And it caused us no end of misery, if you like, because some of the centres were very new and therefore weren't productive. Some of the centres were very good. You know, Manchester and places like that were sensational, but we inherited a lot of centres that were not very good. But we bought them. We just bought them. It's more like, a bit like buying a kind of job lot. And to a certain extent, that created even more problems for us, because it's one thing when we've opened one of our own centres or a number of our own centres. It's quite a different thing when you inherit a centre and you've got to then start making good on it. So look, I think it was a wonderful experience going on AIM. It was fantastic. And financially, we did very, very well out of it. Absolutely. If I had my time again, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it.
That's what I was coming to. That's what I was coming to, because I think a lot of people think you kind of, it's the end game, but it can be quite difficult, can't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Can I talk to you about, I mean, fairly topical sort of post-Brexit era, doing business overseas? I mean, obviously, you've worked in, I think, Scandinavia, France, Spain, and the US. Are there big differences to cultures, business culture in particular?
Well, I think there are. I think it's absolutely right, and I think the differences are very, very interesting, really. So if I start off with UK, I like dealing with people in the UK. Maybe it's because kind of I'm a Brit, but I understand them and they understand me. And typically, and you can only generalise really, but when somebody gives you their word that they're going to do something, by and large they try and do it. Whereas in France, what happens is that they are forever theorising about things, forever going into great long theory about what could happen, what should happen, rather than actually doing the business. So I think there's a lot of time that's wasted in France about showing how clever they are. And so rather than getting on with it, they tend to kind of just talk about it a lot. Also, the hierarchy situation in France is quite different. If you're the boss, you basically are God, and whatever you say goes. Even a senior manager, even some of my other directors in France, they would never discuss it, never argue with me, never. What I said, they walked out of the room and that's what they did. They're like no brain work. No one challenged me or suggested an alternative. Whereas in the UK, it was much more, you could talk about whatever you wanted to talk about. Now I'm going to talk about Spain. I went to Spain, and the company, the Amstrad company in Spain, was horrific. It was terrible. It was on its knees. All kinds of things had gone wrong. It was a disaster. And what happened was, like for example, my first day there, I went into the company, and you know, the finance director and the lawyer, in-house lawyer, they were very, very friendly. They both spoke English, which was helpful because my Spanish wasn't great. We kind of chatted and everything seemed to be fine. I went back into my office, and then at midday, I walked out of my office. There's no one there. There's no one there. They've all gone. So I thought, okay, they've gone for lunch. And what I'd done in the morning is I'd given them a bit of a talking to. Now, my Spanish isn't great, as I'd said, but I kind of thought, that, you know, I said, look, we've got to get down to some serious business. Got to get on with it. Got to turn this company around. We can do it. Anyway, walked out at midday. There was no one there. And I mean, not a soul there, just me in this vast office. So I thought, okay, they're at lunch. So 1 o'clock came. I thought, well, they'll start drifting back soon enough. By 4 o'clock, no one had come back. So I phoned Alan and I said, look, bit of a problem. Don't take it too badly. I think I've actually destroyed the company completely because they've all walked out. Don't be such an idiot. There's siesta. They'll be back. They'll be back. And sure enough, they drifted back at about 5 o'clock. And truthfully, they stayed until 9 o'clock. So it wasn't they were kind of, you know, not doing the hours. They weren't doing any work, but they were doing the hours. But just it's a completely different way of working. Completely different way. There was a computer guy there, and we had this sort of big mainframe, IBM, and he'd come in the morning and switch it on, presumably, and then he'd walk up and down all day. He'd walk up and down the office, up and down. So I said to him, Javier, what are you doing? I thinking. Anyway, that didn't end well for Javier, I can tell you that. But coming on to Scandinavia, so I went to Scandinavia right after Spain, after Madrid, went to Scandinavia, and it was in Upper Jutland. and the company, Alan had bought the company for a song, and essentially there was no one in the company, everyone had got fired, and so I started to bring people back into the company. Having come from Spain, where they were, in that particular company, they were particularly lazy. I was shouting at people because I was just frustrated and wanting to get things done. And my secretary or PA, whatever she was, she came up to me and said, "Do you have a mental problem?" So I said, "No." "Well, what do you mean?" So she said, "Well, if you just talk to us normally, we'll do whatever you ask. But if you shout at us, we won't." So I had a reality check, if you like, about the fact that these were normal people. And I had, from my experience at Spain and being kind of frustrated, I just didn't behave rationally. And in fact, they were super people, highly educated, wonderful people, very, very hardworking. They were terrific. And within a short space of time, the company began to take off really, and the company did really well. So that was sort of a bit of a shock to me, really, about just behaving like a normal human being. You can get a lot more done than by screaming and shouting. Well, my American experience was interesting because the company was in terrible trouble, and they had something like $2.5 billion of sales. So it was quite a nice, substantial company, and they'd won awards. And in fact, I've still got these tombs, but the awards were all about sales, not about profit, because we were making phenomenal losses, the most horrific losses imaginable. And Bank of Scotland thought this was a wonderful thing for me to go into. In the US, it was in the southern states, so it was in New Orleans and Texas, and they all walk around with their Stetsons. I mean, it's like the Wild West. It really is. They've got they've got their guns, and they talk big. They're all oil barons. They're all oil, and everyone's trying to prove that they're richer and got more than everyone else. And it's kind of it's like brinkmanship and gamesmanship. And whatever they said, you couldn't rely on a word. Couldn't rely on a word. So there was one situation where I'd reached an agreement to sell one of our docks. We had 17 docks or whatever it was in New Orleans and around that area, around the Mississippi River. And I'd made an arrangement to sell one of the docks, £17 million. So it was a nice little deal. We wanted to get rid of it. The guy who I spoke to wanted to buy it, and he was a competitor, so it worked out fine. And he said, "Look, we'll do the deal. Do you want to fly into me, or shall I fly into you?" Well, I haven't got a plane, but they've all got planes because they're all kind of, that's the way they operate. So I said, "No, you fly into me." So Monday came along, and I'm waiting. I've been waiting the whole weekend, waiting and waiting and waiting. In the end, I phoned the guy up. I said, "Well, where are we doing the deal? We're doing the deal. Where did you want me to be?" So he said, "No, forget about the deal. No, I'm in Florida. I'm playing golf. Go away." So you can't believe a word they say. And it was, they tried to put the company into Chapter 11. It was a nightmare, a nightmare. Just tell you one last story about that, if I may, Jeff. So we were desperate for money, and Fleet, who were our bankers, were going to put us in Chapter 11. But fortunately, we had a contact at, I can't think who they were, at another bank. And they were coming in the following day. Now, the dress code in New Orleans was t-shirts, jeans, just casual. The president of the company was just casual. Everything was casual. So I said to him, I said, "Look, tomorrow when the bank come in, Wells Fargo, dress properly. Don't come with a filthy, dirty, tea-stained, or whatever it is, t-shirt. Come in smart, okay? Let's make a good impression on these guys. And let's cut the jokes, because they're very jokey. They've got all these folklore-y, jokey things." I said, "Let's be serious. Let's just present the facts to them, and hopefully we're going to get them to lend us money on good terms. It'll be great." So the following day they came in, they're wearing the filthy, dirty shirts, filthy, dirty thing. I said, "Look, why I asked you particularly to get dressed." So, "No, it's okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. It'll be okay. Don't worry." So they got into the banker arrived, and he was dressed in dirty t-shirt and torn jeans. And they're sitting there telling, not dirty jokes, telling jokes, jokey jokes. And I was just wanted to get on with, let's do the presentation now. Anyway, after joking around, it was wonderful. They were all laughing. They were having a wonderful time. I was plutzing, and we decided to go for lunch. So I went with the Wells Fargo manager in his car, and just to make kind of pleasant conversation, I said to him, so what do you do in your spare time? So he said, I shoot. So I said, oh, that's wonderful, very interesting. I said, what do you shoot? And he said, anything that moves. And so, and with that, he opened up his sort of, whatever it was, and there he had a rifle, and he had guns in there, and he's tooled up. He's ready to shoot whatever moves. And I think that was the culture. In actual fact, Wells Fargo, we got on really well with them, and in spite of the dirty t-shirts and torn jeans, they saved us. And
maybe because of the dirty t-shirts and the torn jeans and the jokes, maybe because of.
That's what they like. They like that. It was like, they're folksy. They kind of, that's their way of saying, you know, we're mates. You know, that was their sort of banter. And so I found the culture thing very, very different, very, very different, very, very different. And of course, having cast a terrible light on the southern states, when I've transacted in New York, I've always found them to be very straightforward, very businesslike, very, very forthright, and wanting to do things the right way. So those are kind of my experiences, really.
So there's no generalisations then with our foreign counterparts.
No, I don't think so.
Simon's giving me the nod. I could talk to you all night. I did want to ask you, if I may, one last question before we sort of open it to our audience. And it's a bit personal question, if you don't mind. I know that you had cancer around the time that you finished at Tottenham before Power League, and it was quite serious. I know that. Has that changed your outlook on life and business at all? Well,
at the time I was going through the trauma of cancer, it was really the effect on my family that was most concerning, because I was a victim. Whatever was going to happen to me was going to happen to me, but it was very, very hurtful to watch my parents and my family suffering. So that was a very, very trying time. I've got to say that Alan Sugar was actually, he saved my life. I'll just tell you the story very quickly. Alan came into my office at Tottenham, which is something he very rarely did, and he was obviously very angry. Now, I've not had many rows with Alan, basically because I try and avoid them. But on this particular occasion, he was beside himself with fury, and he started screaming and shouting at me. And it wasn't, whatever it was he was talking about, I knew nothing of it. And he'd obviously got the wrong end of the stick. I'd listened to somebody who told him something which was untrue. So I thought the idea really was to not argue with him. So whilst he was ranting and raving, and he was walking up and down the boardroom table there, I just picked up my case, my briefcase, and walked out. Also, I switched the phone off because I thought that would really annoy him. And I thought, well, while I've got the day off, so to speak, and possibly the rest of my life off, I went to see a doctor, and the doctor then realised that I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So just coming back onto the question, once I was in remission. I don't think it was like an immediate thing that morning I decided that my life would be different. But I think over time, I realised and I reflected on the experiences I'd had, which were horrific, really, horrific experiences. Just the whole thing of being so sick, of seeing so many other people and children with cancer, and just the whole trauma of the whole thing. I mean, on one particular occasion, I was in a lift going up to some nuclear place or whatever it was, and I got in the lift and I was wearing my coat because I was freezing cold all the time. This guy said, oh, I've got the same thing as you. So I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. He said, no, I'm a Spurs supporter as well, because I was wearing my Spurs coat. And I got into this room and there were a whole load of people there, and I looked around at them and I thought, these people are dead. They're dead. They're emaciated. They're dead. And I realized I was one of them. And you just couldn't get away from the fact that you're going through this thing and it's just horrific. It is horrific. Anyway, on the brighter side, thanks to my sister, eventually I got into remission, and I began to work again. But my work was hampered, because even though I was free of the disease, all the drugs I was taking had terrible effects on my body. So it probably was about a year or two before I kind of resumed some kind of normality of life. And it was really at that stage where I reflected on what I was going to do in life and how I was going to behave. And whilst my personality, my nature, I can't help it. I think I'm a better person for it. I think I'm much more sensitive to people who are ill, much more sensitive to people who can't do things through mental illness or whatever it happens to be, which is something that I certainly wasn't aware of even in my earlier days. And I think that I think I'm a better person for it, but I wouldn't want anyone to go through that experience to come out a better person. So I'm much more sensitive. And now that I've reached, in my 70s, I'm certainly much more sensitive about illness, about health, about other people, what they do, just being a bit more careful, a bit more caring, just a bit more sensitive, a bit more understanding about some of the things that other people go through that I just have had no experience of. So it was a painful period.
Thanks for being so open. Simon, over back to you. You've got some questions that our audience want to ask Claude.
Yes, thank you. And that's been absolutely fascinating, Claude. We've got some questions, just going back to the start of the talk, where we were talking about interviews. One here from Rob, who says, what's the typical view on the typical situation where interviewers never give feedback? How are candidates to learn from what wasn't working?
I think that's a great shame. The trouble is, certainly in my day, people did give you feedback, and I think it was part of the interview or post-interview process where they said, well, we don't want you. Obviously they didn't want me, but they gave me some fair reasons, although they probably weren't necessarily honest reasons, but it was just a matter of giving you some sort of feedback. I think nowadays people are very worried about giving feedback, first of all because you might say something inappropriate and therefore you might find that you get yourself into trouble. The company are very careful about what they say because they don't want themselves landing into a situation where they could be, the reason why you didn't get the job could be misinterpreted. But I think it's a damn shame that people aren't giving feedback, because it is a very important way of learning. Now, it could well be that when you leave that room, you know the mistakes you've made, you know what you didn't do right, but there may be a lot of other things where, but for a little bit of information, next time round you might correct it, you might smile more, you might give eye contact, you might shake the person's hand firmly, you might do a whole host of little things which perhaps you didn't do at that interview. So I think feedback is useful. I think the other thing is that there are so many people who are unemployed or who are looking for jobs that I think people are now inundated with, especially because of the internet. I think you just, it's just a factory now. So you've got these monster or whatever these sort of websites are for employment. And I think they're just swamped with people who want jobs, and they can't spend the time to actually go back to every person and give some kind of analysis on what they did right or what they did wrong or why they didn't get the job. So it's easier to just do nothing, which I think is shameful. But I think that's the way of the world. I think people are less personal than they used to be. In the old days, maybe you'd write a letter or you'd receive a letter from the company telling you that you were very good, but unfortunately you didn't get the job. Whereas now you just get nothing. You're waiting in hope and anticipation, and most of the time you get nothing.
Very good, thank you. Got one here which is an interesting one. What drives you now, and how do you know when enough is enough?
Enough's already enough. It's first of all, I know that I'm not, I haven't got the aptitude I used to have in my 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I think there's a realization that I've slowed down, but more importantly, I've achieved what I want to achieve. So I'm very happy to step away, not get my heart rate going to such an extent that I get anxious about everything, and just generally focus on things that I actually want to do. So, being with someone like Jeff is a joy. Going on holidays is fantastic. Spending time with my family is wonderful. Doing the business things that I do with Alan Sugar is great because there's no pressure. Being involved with the university is just joyful. And so I just think it's a matter of extracting the most you can out of life. And financially, I've got zero interest. So I do charitable work or whatever I do it because I want to do it. And I'm proud that I've got, I'm a trustee of some charities, and that they welcome me. And whatever profile I've got, I'm pleased about my profile, and I'm very pleased about the opportunity I have for, having an evening like this, for example.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we've still got time for a few more questions. So one here from Richard Osborne. Who is your favourite, in inverted commas, apprentice candidate ever, and who's been the most impressive?
Look, the truth is that they're all impressive. In one way or another, they're all characters. They've all come on the show and put themselves in a vulnerable position, and they do it with enthusiasm. So I take my hat off to all of them. Now, I don't like them all. I don't think that all of them are going to be astute business people, but you've got to give credit where it's due. And I think this is not an easy environment. Being stuck for all those weeks in a house with strangers, being woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning, being shuttled around all over the place, having to perform every single day. The boardroom is intense and intimidating. The interviews are not fun for the candidates. I think the whole process is very difficult. And so I really salute all the apprentices who come along and want that one goal, but also just put themselves out and put themselves in a vulnerable situation. As far as my favourites, look, when I think about it, I kind of like a lot of them. Even the ones who have annoyed me, I look back and I think, well, they were lovely characters. They were wonderful people. So, as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking about some of them, and they were very annoying on the show, but they were characters, they were personalities, and they did their best. As far as the people who have performed well, I think Alan has been very lucky, or no, not lucky, very assiduous in terms of choosing the people who have got a business brain, are entrepreneurial, and for the most part, they've been successful. Some of them have been highly successful, and have gone on to build companies which are, envious. I'd be envious of. And there are others who didn't get to the final, didn't make it through, but who I keep in touch with or keep in touch with me, and they've done very, very well for themselves. Some of them haven't, but I think it's a mixed bag, and I've got nothing but admiration for all the people who go on The Apprentice.
Fantastic. And just on the kind of similar theme, but actually it ends up being a much broader question, something here from Tim Constable. So in The Apprentice, you're well known for picking out the big fibs in business plans. But the broader question is around, do you think that generally that honesty is less important than it used to be?
No, I think honesty beats everything, really, because I'm not saying you've got to expose all your warts, but I think that you've got to be pretty open, honest and communicative, because the big difficulty is that if you're not straightforward, either the interviewer will see through you, or more likely, when you get onto the job, you can't do it. And then the worst thing is you've had the thrill of getting the job, and then you've got the pain of actually losing the job very quickly when people realize you're not up to it. So, I think honesty is the right thing. But that's not to say that you've got to be, blatantly honest about all the failures. You want to concentrate on your successes, obviously. But if somebody asks you a question, I don't think there's anything wrong with telling the truth, really, about things that haven't gone quite so well.
I mean, Simon, perhaps I can add something to that. I mean, you're talking mainly about interviews, Claude, but I think integrity in business is something that is paramount, at least to a successful ongoing relationship. If you're dishonest with somebody once, that is the last time you will do business with that person. So
that's absolutely right. I mean, I was thinking of the interview, but you're absolutely right. In business, I think you've got to be straight. And again, I'm going to come back to Alan Sugar. is that he's disarmingly straight. I mean, there are situations where we're in where I wouldn't tell the other party that particular bit of information because I think it may jeopardize the relationship, or it may put me in a worse bargaining position. But Alan is absolutely straight out. This is how it is. If you like it, you like it, and that's great. But this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And this is what I'm not going to do. So I think being straight, and that's right. And also you feel good about it, because if you tell somebody, you're honest with somebody, you're straight with them, they're straight with you, that is a building block for a future engagement. So I think that is a very important characteristic, really important. At the end of the day, your good name is what you've got. Everything else kind of goes by the wayside. So I think that integrity is paramount.
Fantastic. And we've got one here from Elliot, who has said that he's recently taken on board investment to enable them to make acquisitions. Why do UK entrepreneurs tend to sell rather than build large corporations? What does the US do right? And is it a problem with the London Stock Exchange?
No, I can't really answer that question. I just think it's horses for courses. I think the Americans are far more adventurous, far more commercial, far less worried about failure. And I just think they are just a bit more gung-ho. I think the whole of the US is much more geared towards entrepreneurs and growing and all that kind of thing. Whereas in the UK, I think we're a little bit reserved. I think we're a little bit careful, and I think that may hold us back. Having said that, of course, I think that there's nothing wrong with being a little bit cautious.
Of course, we've also got an economy that's 6 times the size of the UK to start with. So
yeah, exactly. It's a vast economy, and they've got wealth in all different areas.
Okay,
also is one where the American culture seems to be a lot more adventurous. I think in this country we're a bit more reserved.
So let me ask one of our partners, if I may, which I see has come up which is a great question. If you've learned one thing in your time and considerable experience in business, what would you say it was?
It's just listen a lot. Just listen a lot. Try and listen and figure out things. Listen, because when you're talking, you can't listen. And I've been talking a lot this evening, but I think you can learn a lot by just being a bit quieter. And I think I've been guilty of that, of maybe jumping to conclusions too quickly, having my own mindset and not listening to people. But you have to follow what people say. But I think if you listen, I think you can gain quite a lot.
My dad said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Very true.
We've had a couple of questions here about motivation. So when a team performs really well year after year, how do you motivate them to achieve greater results the next year? That's from Jason.
Yeah, look, Jason, I just think that I'm an energetic, motivating type of person, and the people I work with, I like them to be of the same ilk. So just because you've achieved your objective in year 1, you want to kind of achieve more in year 2 if you can. So I don't think it's something that it's got to be something that's within you. You want to do well, you want to learn more, you want to improve, and to the extent that you've got people who are like-minded working with you, I think you can make tremendous progress. So I think that's the key. It's got to come from within. You've got to have that engine sort of really running where you want to do stuff. And the other thing to say is that if you don't, there's nothing wrong. We're not all built the same. Striving for something all the time is not necessarily the right way to live your life.
You're very competitive, Claude, as I have found when we've played tennis together.
Well,
and I know from your Scrabble games. Do you think that competitive spirit is something that provides motivation to do better and better and better? Is that?
Well, look, I've got a screw loose. I don't like losing. Okay, so when you beat me at tennis and we go for a drink afterwards, you're enjoying your drink. I'm not, Jeff. Okay, I'm raging with the fact that I didn't put it down the line, or or didn't cross it, or didn't serve properly. So I don't like losing. I just don't like. I've got a screw loose. With Scrabble as well. Okay, I play Scrabble with Thelma. It's very competitive. I don't like losing. I don't like it. What can I say? It's just. It's just the way I'm built. But I don't think it's necessarily something that is right for everyone. I think that there should be give and take. And certainly in business, when you're reaching a negotiation, both parties have got to feel that they've kind of won or that they're satisfied. So you can't have somebody who's, you know, gung-ho, thinks he's won, and the other person thinks, oh, I've done a terrible deal and everything goes sour. So I think in business, you've got to kind of be more measured.
I think we're almost out of time. I think perhaps with just one final question, and something that's very close to our hearts at BKL, and that is, can you provide any lessons or impart any knowledge on diversity and inclusion within business?
Well, you know, I've never. I'm from a minority, okay, and so I've always been someone who has never taken much notice, if you like, of whether someone's black or Asian or whatever they are. All I care about is their ability. That for me is fundamental. And man, woman, it doesn't make any difference to me. I just want the best person for the job. Having said that, and with thinking about things in a bit of a broader sense, I think that women haven't had a fair shake. I think that it's been a man's world, and I think now they are coming into their own, and I'm not at all unhappy about that. So I'm almost positively discriminating by saying that some people haven't had an opportunity, the same opportunity that many of us have had, and so I think that I think now I'd be trying to offer women more jobs, offer people the opportunity, and I think that it's never been important to me because I've never looked at the colour of their skin or religion or anything like that. I just want the person to do the best job that they can, because if they do well, I'll be doing well, and that's the selfish way that I've looked at things. But I think there is a bigger picture here of actually giving opportunities to people who have shown themselves to be worthy, have had a harder upbringing, but I've still got character and want to succeed. So I think if I was 20 years younger and I was looking for people, I'd be positively looking for people who have come up the hard way and given them perhaps more opportunity.
Claude, I think, as Simon says, we've run out of time. I just wanted to say, I mean, we were going to have this chat 18 months ago. It's been a long time coming, but it's been worth every second of it. I want to thank you again. I want to thank everybody who's joined us tonight. I'm sure they want to thank you for not only a very interesting, but also entertaining hour. And I wish you continued good health. And I look forward to being able to buy that meal for you that we were talking about just before.
Thank you.
And again, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Simon, for hosting. And thanks, everybody. Have a very good evening. And we will see you on the next Evening With, which Simon will send out notes about in the near future.
And I'd like to say just finally, thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone at BKL. It's been a pleasure being involved with you all these years. You've looked after me magnificently. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone who's tuned in. I haven't seen any of you, but I hope you've enjoyed the evening as well.
Thanks again, Claude. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.